Fields devastated, the Razi is exercised there, 200 murders perhaps to obtain a dozen slaves. Evening has arrived, halt for the night, camp made under great trees. High shrubs forming a thicket on the border of the forest. Some prisoners fled the night before, after breaking their forks. They have been retaken and treated with unprecedented cruelty. The soldiers' and overseers' watchfulness is redoubled. Night has come, roaring of lions and hyenas, distant snorting of hippopotami, doubtless some lake or watercourse near. In spite of my fatigue, I cannot sleep. I think of so many things. Then, it seems to me that I hear prowling in the high grass. Some animal, perhaps, would it dare force an entrance into the camp? I listen, nothing? Yes, an animal is passing through the reeds. I am unarmed. I shall defend myself nevertheless. My life may be useful to Mrs. Weldon, to my companions. I look through the profound darkness. There is no moon. The night is extremely dark. Two eyes shine in the darkness among the papyrus, two eyes of a hyena or a leopard. They disappear, reappear. At last there is a rustling of the bushes. An animal springs upon me. I am going to cry out to give the alarm. Fortunately, I was able to restrain myself. I cannot believe my eyes. It is Dingo, Dingo who is near me. Brave Dingo, how is it restored to me? How has it been able to find me again? Ah, instinct, would instinct be sufficient to explain such miracles of fidelity? It licks my hands. Ah, good dog, now my only friend, they have not killed you then. It understands me. I return its caresses. It wants to bark. I calm it, it must not be heard. Let it follow the caravan in this way, without being seen and perhaps. But what? It rubs its neck obstinately against my hands. It seems to say to me, look for something. I look and I feel something there fastened to its neck. A piece of reed is slipped under the collar, on which are graven those two letters, SV, the mystery of which is still inexplicable to us. Yes, I have unfastened the reed, I have broken it. There is a letter inside, but this letter, I cannot read it, I must wait for daylight. Daylight, I should like to keep Dingo, but the good animal, even while licking my hands, seems in a hurry to leave me. It understands that its mission is finished. With one bound aside, it disappears among the bushes without noise. May God spare it from the lion's and hyena's teeth. Dingo has certainly returned to him who sent it to me. This letter that I cannot yet read burns my hands. Who has written it? Would it come from Mrs. Weldon? Does it come from Hercules? How has the faithful animal that we believed dead met either the one or the other? What is this letter going to tell me? Is it a plan of escape that it brings me? Or does it only give me news of those dear to me? Whatever it may be, this incident has greatly moved me and has relaxed my misery. Ah, the day comes so slowly. I watch for the least light on the horizon. I cannot close my eyes. I still hear the roaring of the animals. My poor Dingo, can you escape them? At last day is going to appear, and almost without dawn, under these tropical latitudes. I settle myself so as not to be seen. I try to read, I cannot yet. At last I have read. The letter is from Hercules's hand. It is written on a bit of paper in pencil. Here is what it says. Mrs. Weldon was taken away with little Jack in a catanda. Harris and Negoro accompany it. They precede the caravan by 3 or 4 marches with cousin Benedict. I have not been able to communicate with her. I have found Dingo, who must have been wounded by a shot but cured. Good hope, Mr. Dick. I only think of you all, and I fled to be more useful to you. Hercules. Ah, Mrs. Weldon and her son are living. God be praised, they have not to suffer the fatigues of these rude halting places. A kitanda, it is a kind of litter of dry grass, suspended to a long bamboo, that 2 men carry on the shoulder. A stuff curtain covers it over. Mrs. Weldon and her little Jack are in that kitanda. What does Harris and Negoro want to do with them? Those wretches are evidently going to Cazoned. Yes, yes, I shall find them again. Ah, in all this misery it is good news, it is joy that Dingo has brought me. From May 11th to 15th, the caravan continues its march. The prisoners drag themselves along more and more painfully. The majority have marks of blood under their feet. I calculate that it will take 10 days more to reach Cazoned. How many will have ceased to suffer before then? But I must arrive there, I shall arrive there. It is atrocious. There are, in the convoy, unfortunate ones whose bodies are only wounds. The cords that bind them enter into the flesh. Since yesterday, a mother carries in her arms her little infant, dead from hunger. She will not separate from it. Our route is strewn with dead bodies. The smallpox rages with new violence. We have just passed near a tree. To this tree slaves were attached by the neck. They were left there to die of hunger. From May 16th to 24th, I am almost exhausted, but I have no right to give up. The rains have entirely ceased. We have days of hard marching. That is what the traders call the treacherous, or afternoon march. We must go faster, and the ground rises in rather steep ascents. We pass through high shrubs of a very tough kind. They are the nyaceae, the branches of which tear the skin off my face, whose sharp seeds penetrate to my skin under my dilapidated clothes. My strong boots have fortunately kept good. The agents have commenced to abandon the slaves too sick to keep up. Besides, food threatens to fail. Soldiers and pagazis would revolt if their rations were diminished. They dare not retrench from them, and then so much worse for the captives. "Let them eat one another," said the chief. Then it follows that young slaves, still strong, die without the appearance of sickness. I remember what Dr. Livingstone has said on that subject. Those unfortunates complain of the heart. They put their hands there and they fall. It is positively the heart that breaks. That is peculiar to free men, reduced to slavery unexpectedly. Today, 20 captives who could no longer drag themselves along have been massacred with axes by the havildars. The Arab chief is not opposed to massacre. The scene has been frightful. Poor old Nan has fallen under the knife in this horrible butchery. I strike against her corpse in passing. I cannot even give her a Christian burial. She is first of the pilgrims, survivors whom God has called back to him. Poor good creature, poor Nan. I watch for Dingo every night. It returns no more. Has misfortune overtaken it, or Hercules? No, no, I do not want to believe it. This silence, which appears so long to me, only proves one thing. It is that Hercules has nothing new to tell me yet. Besides, he must be prudent and on his guard. Chapter 9. Kazonde. On May 26th, the caravan of slaves arrived at Kazonde. 50% of the prisoners taken in the last raid had fallen on the road. Meanwhile, the business was still good for the traders. Demands were coming in, and the price of slaves was about to rise in the African markets. Angola at this period did an immense trade in blacks. The Portuguese authorities of St. Paul de Londa, or of Benguela, could not stop it without difficulty, for the convoys traveled towards the interior of the African continent. The pens near the coast overflowed with prisoners, the few slavers that succeeded in eluding the cruisers along the shore not being sufficient to carry all of them to the Spanish colonies of America. Kazonde, situated 300 miles from the mouth of the Konza, is one of the principal, Lacanus, one of the most important markets of the province. On its grand square, the Tichitoka business is transacted. There, the slaves are exposed and sold. It is from this point that the caravans radiate toward the region of the Great Lakes. Kazonde, like all the large towns of Central Africa, is divided into two distinct parts. One is the quarter of the Arab, Portuguese, or native traders, and it contains their pens. The other is the residence of the Negro king, some ferocious crown drunkard who reigns through terror and lives from supplies furnished by the contractors. At Kazonde, the commercial quarter then belonged to that José Antonio Alves, of whom Harris and Negoro had spoken, they being simply agents in his pay. This contractor's principal establishment was there. He had a second at Bith, and a third at Cassange in Benguela, which Lieutenant Cameron visited some years later. Imagine a large central street, on each side groups of houses, Thames, with flat roofs, walls of baked earth, and a square court which served as an enclosure for cattle. At the end of the street was the vast Tichitoka, surrounded by slave pens. Above this collection of buildings rose some enormous banyans, whose branches swayed with graceful movements. Here and there great palms, with their heads in the air, drove the dust on the streets like brooms. 20 birds of prey watched over the public health. Such is the business quarter of Kazonde. Nearby ran the Lauhai, a river whose course, still undetermined, is an affluent, or at least a subaffluent of the Congo, a tributary of the Zouar. The residence of the king of Kazonde, which borders on the business quarter, is a confused collection of ill-built hovels, which spread over the space of a mile square. Of these hovels, some are open, others are enclosed by a palisade of reeds or bordered with a hedge of fig trees. In one particular enclosure, surrounded by a fence of papyrus, 30 of these huts served as dwellings for the chief's slaves. In another group lived his wives, and a tembe, still larger and higher, was half hidden in a plantation of cassata. Such was the residence of the king of Kazonde, a man of 50, named Monilaunga. and already almost deprived of the power of his predecessors. He had not 4,000 of soldiers there, where the principal Portuguese traders could count 20,000, and he could no longer, as in former times, decree the sacrifice of 25 or 30 slaves a day. This king was, besides, a prematurely aged man, exhausted by debauch, crazed by strong drink, a ferocious maniac, mutilating his subjects, his officers or his ministers, as the whim seized him, cutting the nose and ears off some, and the foot or the hand from others. His own death, not unlooked for, would be received without regret. A single man in all Kazond might, perhaps, lose by the death of Moinilonga. This was the contractor, José Antonio Alves, who agreed very well with the drunkard, whose authority was recognized by the whole province. If the accession of his first wife, Queen Moini, should be contested, the states of Moinilonga might be invaded by a neighboring competitor, one of the kings of Alconsin. The latter, being younger and more active, had already seized some villages belonging to the Kazon government. He had in his services another trader, a rival of Alves Tipo Tipo, a black Arab of a pure race, whom Cameron met at Enyangwe. What was this Alves, the real sovereign under the reign of an imbruted Negro, whose vices he had developed and served? José Antonio Alves, already advanced in years, was not, as one might suppose, a Msangu, that is to say, a man of the white race. There was nothing Portuguese about him but his name, borrowed, no doubt, for the needs of commerce. He was a real Negro, well known among traders and called Kendel. He was born, in fact, at Dondo, or the borders of the Konza. He had commenced by being simply the agent of the slave brokers, and would have finished as a famous trader, that is to say, in the skin of an old knave, who called himself the most honest man in the world. Cameron met this Alves in the latter part of 1874 at Quilomba, the capital of Kasongo, chief of Orwa. He guided Cameron with his caravan to his own establishment at Bith, over a route of 700 miles. The convoy of slaves, on arriving at Kazond, had been conducted to the large square. It was the 26th of May. Dick Sand's calculations were then verified. The journey had lasted 38 days from the departure of the army, encamped on the banks of the Konza. 5 weeks of the most fearful miseries that human beings could support. It was noon when the train entered Kazond. The drums were beaten, horns were blown in the midst of the detonations of firearms. The soldiers guarding the caravan discharged their guns in the air, and the men employed by José Antonio Alves replied with interest. All these bandits were happy at meeting again, after an absence which had lasted for 4 months. They were now going to rest and make up for lost time in excesses and idleness. The prisoners then formed a total of 250, the majority being completely exhausted. After having been driven like cattle, they were to be shut up in pens, which American farmers would not have used for pigs. 12 or 1,500 other captives awaited them, all of whom would be exposed in the market at Kazond on the next day but one. These pens were filled up with the slaves from the caravan. The heavy forks had been taken off them, but they were still in chains. The pagazis had stopped on the square after having disposed of their loads of ivory, which the Kazon dealers would deliver. Then, being paid with a few yards of calico or other stuff at the highest price, they would return and join some other caravan. Old Tom and his companions had been freed from the iron collar which they had carried for 5 weeks. Bat and his father embraced each other, and all shook hands, but no one ventured to speak. What could they say that would not be an expression of despair? Bat, Actaeon, and Austin, all three vigorous, accustomed to hard work, had been able to resist fatigue, but old Tom, weakened by privations, was nearly exhausted. A few more days and his corpse would have been left, like poor Nan's, as food for the beasts of the province. As soon as they arrived, the 4 men had been placed in a narrow pen, and the door had been at once shut upon them. There they had found some food, and they awaited the trader's visit, with whom, although quite in vain, they intended to urge the fact that they were Americans. Dick Sand had remained alone on the square, under the special care of a keeper. At length he was at Kazond, where he did not doubt that Mrs. Weldon, little Jack, and cousin Benedict had preceded him. He had looked for them in crossing the various quarters of the town, even in the depths of the Thames that lined the streets, on this Teachatoka, now almost deserted. Mrs. Weldon was not there. Have they not brought her here? He asked himself. But where could she be? No, Hercules cannot be mistaken. Then again, he must have learned the secret designs of Negoro and Harris, yet they too, I do not see them. Dick Sand felt the most painful anxiety. He could understand that Mrs. Weldon, retained a prisoner, would be concealed from him. But Harris and Negoro, particularly the latter, should hasten to see him, now in their power, if only to enjoy their triumph, to insult him, torture him, perhaps avenge themselves. From the fact that they were not there, must he conclude that they had taken another direction, and that Mrs. Weldon was to be conducted to some other point of Central Africa? Should the presence of the American and the Portuguese be the signal for his punishment, Dick Sand impatiently desired it. Harris and Negoro at Cazonde was for him the certainty that Mrs. Weldon and her child were also there. Dick Sand then told himself that, since the night when Dingo had brought him Hercules's note, the dog had not been seen. The young man had prepared an answer at great risks. In it, he told Hercules to think only of Mrs. Weldon, not to lose sight of her, and to keep her informed as well as possible of what happened, but he had not been able to send it to its destination. If Dingo had been able to penetrate the ranks of the caravan once, why did not Hercules let him try it a second time? Had the faithful animal perished in some fruitless attempt? Perhaps Hercules was following Mrs. Weldon, as Dick Sand would have done in his place. Followed by Dingo, he might have plunged into the depths of the woody plateau of Africa, in the hope of reaching one of the interior establishments. What could Dick Sand imagine if, in fact, neither Mrs. Weldon nor her enemies were there? He had been so sure, perhaps foolishly, of finding them at Cazonde, that not to see them there at once gave him a terrible shock. He felt a sensation of despair that he could not subdue. His life, if it were no longer useful to those whom he loved, was good for nothing, and he had only to die. But, in thinking in that manner, Dick Sand mistook his own character. Under the pressure of these trials, the child became a man, and with him discouragement could only be an accidental tribute paid to human nature. A loud concert of trumpet calls and cries suddenly commenced. Dick Sand, who had just sunk down in the dust of the Tichitoka, stood up. Every new incident might put him on the track of those whom he sought. In despair a moment before, he now no longer despaired. Alves, Alves, this name was repeated by a crowd of natives and soldiers who now invaded the grand square. The man on whom the fate of so many unfortunate people depended was about to appear. It was possible that his agents, Harris and Negoro, were with him. Dick Sand stood upright, his eyes open, his nostrils dilated. The two traders would find this lad of 15 years before them, upright, firm, looking them in the face. It would not be the captain of the Pilgrim who would tremble before the old ship's cook. A hammock, a kind of kitanda, covered by an old patched curtain, discolored, fringed with rags, appeared at the end of the principal street. An old Negro descended. It was the trader, José Antonio Alves. Several attendants accompanied him, making strong demonstrations. Along with Alves appeared his friend Coimbra, the son of Major Coimbra of Bih, and, according to Lieutenant Cameron, the greatest scamp in the province. He was a dirty creature, his breast was uncovered, his eyes were bloodshot, his hair was rough and curly, his face yellow, he was dressed in a ragged shirt and a straw petticoat. He would have been called a horrible old man in his tattered straw hat. This Coimbra was the confidant, the tool of Alves, an organizer of raids, worthy of commanding the trader's bandits. As for the trader, he might have looked a little less sordid than his attendant. He wore the dress of an old Turk the day after a carnival. He did not furnish a very high specimen of the factory chiefs who carry on the trade on a large scale. To Dick Sand's great disappointment, neither Harris nor Negoro appeared in the crowd that followed Alves. Must he, then, renounce all hope of finding them at Cazonde? Meanwhile, the chief of the caravan, the Arab, Ibn Hamis, shook hands with Alves and Coimbra. He received numerous congratulations. Alves made a grimace at the 50% of slaves failing in the general count, but on the whole, the affair was very satisfactory. With what the trader possessed of human merchandise in his pens, he could satisfy the demands from the interior and barter slaves for ivory teeth and those, Hannahs of copper, a kind of St. Andrew's cross, in which form this metal is carried into the center of Africa. The overseers were also complimented. As for the porters, the trader gave orders that their salary should be immediately paid them. José Antonio Alves and Coimbra spoke a kind of Portuguese mingled with a native idiom, which a native of Lisbon would scarcely have understood. Dick Sand could not hear what these merchants were saying. Were they talking of him and his companions, so treacherously joined to the persons in the convoy? The young man could not doubt it when, at a gesture from the Arab, Ibn Hamis, an overseer, went toward the pen where Tom, Austin, Bat, and Actaeon had been shut up. Almost immediately, the four Americans were led before Alves. Dick Sand slowly approached. He wished to lose nothing of this scene. Alvez's face lit up at the sight of these few well-made blacks, to whom rest and more abundant food had promptly restored their natural vigor. He looked with contempt at old Tom, whose age would affect his value, but the other three would sell high at the next Cazon sale. Alves remembered a few English words which some agents, like the American, Harris, had taught him, and the old monkey thought he would ironically welcome his new slaves. Tom understood the trader's words. He at once advanced and, showing his companions, said, "We are free men, citizens of the United States." Alves certainly understood him. He replied with a good-humored grimace, wagging his head. "Yes, yes, Americans, welcome, welcome." "Welcome," added Coimbra. He advanced toward Austin, and like a merchant who examines a sample, after having felt his chest and his shoulders, he wanted to make him open his mouth so as to see his teeth. But at this moment, Signor Coimbra received in his face the worst blow that a major's son had ever caught. Alves's confidant staggered under it. Several soldiers threw themselves on Austin, who would perhaps pay dearly for this angry action. Alves stopped them by a look. He laughed, indeed, at the misfortune of his friend, Coimbra, who had lost 2 of the 5 or 6 teeth remaining to him. Alves did not intend to have his merchandise injured. Then, he was of a gay disposition, and it was a long time since he had laughed so much. Meanwhile, he consoled the much discomfited Coimbra, and the latter, helped to his feet, again took his place near the trader, while throwing a menacing look at the audacious Austin. At this moment Dick Sand, driven forward by an overseer, was led before Alves. The latter evidently knew all about the young man, whence he came, and how he had been taken to the camp on the Conza. So he said, after having given him an evil glance, "The little Yankee." "Yes, Yankee," replied Dick Sand. "What do they wish to do with my companions and me?" "Yankee, Yankee, Yankee," repeated Alves. Did he not, or would he not understand the question put to him? A second time Dick Sand asked the question regarding his companions and himself. He then turned to Coimbra, whose features, degraded as they were by the abuse of alcoholic liquors, he saw were not of native origin. Coimbra repeated the menacing gesture already made at Austin, and did not answer. During this time, Alves talked rapidly with the Arab, Ibn Hamis, and evidently of things that concerned Dick Sand and his friends. No doubt they were to be again separated, and who could tell if another chance to exchange a few words would ever again be offered them. "My friends," said Dick in a low voice and as if he were only speaking to himself, "just a few words. I have received by Dingo a letter from Hercules. He has followed the caravan. Harris and Negoro took away Mrs. Weldon, Jack, and Mr. Benedict. Where? I know not if they are not here at Cazond. Patience, courage, be ready at any moment. God may yet have pity on us." "And Nan?" quickly asked old Tom. "Nan is dead." "The first." "And the last," replied Dick Sand, "for we know well." At this moment a hand was laid on his shoulder, and he heard these words, spoken in the amiable voice which he knew only too well. "Ah, my young friend, if I am not mistaken, enchanted to see you again." Dick Sand turned. Harris was before him. "Where is Mrs. Weldon?" cried Dick Sand, walking toward the American. "Alas," replied Harris, pretending a pity that he did not feel, "the poor mother, how could she survive?" "Dead," cried Dick Sand, "and her child." "The poor baby," replied Harris in the same tone, "how could he outlive such fatigue?" So, all whom Dick Sand loved were dead. What passed within him? An irresistible movement of anger, a desire for vengeance, which he must satisfy at any price. Dick Sand jumped upon Harris, seized a dagger from the American's belt, and plunged it into his heart. "Curse you!" cried Harris, falling. Harris was dead. Chapter 10. The Great Market Day. Dick Sand's action had been so rapid that no one could stop him. A few natives threw themselves upon him, and he would have been murdered had not Negoro appeared. At a sign from the Portuguese, the natives drew back, raised Harris's corpse, and carried it away. Alves and Coimbra demanded Dick Sand's immediate death, but Negoro said to them in a low voice that they would lose nothing by waiting. The order was given to take away the young novice, with a caution not to lose sight of him for a moment. Dick Sand had seen Negoro for the first time since their departure from the coast. He knew that this wretch was alone responsible for the loss of the Pilgrim. He ought to hate him still more than his accomplices, and yet, after having struck the American, he scorned to address a word to Negoro. Harris had said that Mrs. Weldon and her child had succumbed. Nothing interested him now, not even what they would do with him. They would send him away. Where? It did not matter. Dick Sand, heavily chained, was left on the floor of a pen without a window, a kind of dungeon where the traitor, Alves, shut up the slaves condemned to death for rebellion or unlawful acts. There he could no longer have any communication with the exterior. He no longer dreamed of regretting it. He had avenged those whom he loved, who no longer lived. Whatever fate awaited him, he was ready for it. It will be understood that if Negoro had stopped the natives who were about to punish Harris's murderer, it was only because he wished to reserve Dick Sand for one of those terrible torments of which the natives hold the secret. The ship's cook held in his power the captain of 15 years. He only wanted Hercules to make his vengeance complete. 2 days afterward, May 28th, the sale began, the Great Laconie, during which the traders of the principal factories of the interior would meet the natives of the neighboring provinces. This market was not specially for the sale of slaves, but all the products of this fertile Africa would be gathered there with the producers. From early morning, all was intense animation on the vast Tichitoka of Kazonde, and it is difficult to give a proper idea of the scene. It was a concourse of 4 or 5 thousand persons, including Alves's slaves, among whom were Tom and his companions. These 4 men, for the reason that they belong to a different race, are all the more valuable to the brokers in human flesh. Alves was there, the first among all. Attended by Coimbra, he offered the slaves in lots. These the traders from the interior would form into caravans. Among these traders were certain half-breeds from Ujiji, the principal market of Lake Tanganyika, and some Arabs, who are far superior to the half-breeds in this kind of trade. The natives flocked there in great numbers. There were children, men, and women, the latter being animated traders, who, as regards a genius for bargaining, could only be compared to their white sisters. In the markets of large cities, even on a great day of sale, there is never much noise or confusion. Among the civilized, the need of selling exceeds the desire to buy. Among these African savages, offers are made with as much eagerness as demands. The Laconie is a festival day for the natives of both sexes, and if for good reasons they do not put on their best clothes, they at least wear their handsomest ornaments. Some wear the hair divided in 4 parts, covered with cushions, and in plaits tied like a chignon or arranged in panhandles on the front of the head, with bunches of red feathers. Others have the hair in bent horns sticky with red earth and oil, like the red lead used to close the joints of machines. In these masses of real or false hair is worn a bristling assemblage of skewers, iron and ivory pins, often even, among elegant people, a tattooing knife is stuck in the crisp mass, each hair of which is put through a sophy or glass bead, thus forming a tapestry of different colored grains. Such are the edifices most generally seen on the heads of the men. The women prefer to divide their hair in little tufts of the size of a cherry, in wreaths, in twists the ends of which form designs in relief, and in corkscrews worn the length of the face. A few, more simple and perhaps prettier, let their long hair hang down the back in the English style, and others wear it cut over the forehead in a fringe, like the French. Generally, they wear on these wigs a greasy putty, made of red clay or of glossy eucola, a red substance extracted from sandalwood, so that these elegant persons look as if their heads were dressed with tiles. It must not be supposed that this luxury of ornamentation is confined to the hair of the natives. What are ears for if not to pass pins of precious wood through? Also copper rings, charms of plaited maize, which draw them forward, or little gourds which do for snuff boxes, and to such an extent that the distended lobes of these appendages fall sometimes to the shoulders of their owners. After all, the African savages have no pockets, and how could they have any? This gives rise to the necessity of placing, where they can, their knives, pipes, and other customary objects. As for the neck, arms, wrists, legs, and ankles, these various parts of the body are undoubtedly destined to carry the copper and brass bracelets, the horns cut off and decorated with bright buttons, the rows of red pearls called same-sames or talakas, and which were very fashionable. Besides, with these jewels worn in profusion, the wealthy people of the place looked like traveling shrines. Again, if nature gave the natives teeth, was it not that they could pull out the upper and lower incisors, file them in points, and curve them in sharp fangs like the fangs of a rattlesnake. If she has placed nails at the end of the fingers, is it not that they may grow so immoderately that the use of the hand is rendered almost impossible? If the skin, black or brown, covers the human frame, is it not so as to zebra it by tembos, or tattooings representing trees, birds, crescents, full moons, or waving lines, in which Livingstone thought he could trace the designs of ancient Egypt? This tattooing, done by fathers, is practiced by means of a blue matter introduced into the incisions, and is stereotyped point by point on the bodies of the children, thus establishing to what tribe or to what family they belong. The coat of arms must be engraved on the breast, when it cannot be painted on the panel of a carriage. Such are the native fashions in ornament. In regard to garments properly so called, they are summed up very easily. For the men, an apron of antelope leather, reaching to the knees, or perhaps a petticoat of a straw material of brilliant colors. For the women, a belt of pearls, supporting at the hips a green petticoat, embroidered in silk, ornamented with glass beads or curry. Sometimes they wear garments made of lamba, a straw material, blue, black, and yellow, which is much prized by the natives of Zanzibar. These, of course, are the Negroes of the best families. The others, merchants and slaves, are seldom clothed. The women generally act as porters and reach the market with enormous baskets on their back, which they hold by means of a leathern strap passed over the forehead. Then, their places being taken and the merchandise unpacked, they squat in their empty baskets. The astonishing fertility of the country causes the choice alimentary produces to be brought to this Laconie. There were quantities of the rice which returns 100%, of the maize, which in 3 crops in 8 months produces 200%, the sesamum, the pepper of Orwa, stronger than the cayenne, allspice, tapioca, sorghum, nutmegs, salt, and palm oil. Hundreds of goats were gathered there, hogs, sheep without wool, evidently of Tartar origin, quantities of poultry and fish. Specimens of pottery, very gracefully turned, attracted the eyes by their violent colors. Various drinks, which the little natives cried about in a squeaking voice, enticed the unwary in the form of plantain wine, pombe, a liquor in great demand, malafu, sweet beer made from the fruit of the banana tree, and mead, a limpid mixture of honey and water fermented with malt. But what made the Kazon market still more curious was the commerce in stuffs and ivory. In the line of stuffs, one might count by thousands of chaukas, or armfuls, the Maricani unbleached calico, come from Salem in Massachusetts, the Kanaki, a blue gingham, 34 inches wide, the Sohari, a stuff in blue and white squares with a red border, mixed with small blue stripes. It is cheaper than the diulis, a silk from Surat with a green, red, or yellow ground, which is worth from $70 to $80 for a remnant of 3 yards when woven with gold. As for ivory, it was brought from all parts of Central Africa, being destined for Khartoum, Zanzibar, or Natal. A large number of merchants are employed solely in this branch of African commerce. Imagine how many elephants are killed to furnish the 500,000 kilograms of ivory, which are annually exported to European markets, and principally to the English. The western coast of Africa alone produces 140 tons of this precious substance. The average weight is 28 pounds for a pair of elephant's tusks, which in 1874 were valued as high as 1,500 francs. But there are some that weigh 175 pounds, and at the Kazan market, admirers would have found some admirable ones. They were of an opaque ivory, translucid, soft under the tool, and with a brown rind, preserving its whiteness and not growing yellow with time like the ivories of other provinces. And now, how are these various business affairs regulated between buyers and sellers? What is the current coin? As we have said, for the African traders, this money is the slave. The native pays in glass beads of Venetian manufacture, called cachocalos, when they are of a lime white, balbulus when they are black, secundareches when they are red. These beads are pearls strung in 10 rows or keats going twice around the neck make the foundo, which is of great value. The usual measure of the beads is the fracilla, which weighs 70 pounds. Livingstone, Cameron, and Stanley were always careful to be abundantly provided with this money. In default of glass beads, the pice, a Zanzibar piece worth 4 centimes, and the vranguas, shells peculiar to the eastern coasts, are current in the markets of the African continent. As for the cannibal tribes, they attach a certain value to the teeth of the human jaw, and at the Laconie, these chaplets were to be seen on the necks of natives, who had no doubt eaten their producers, but these teeth were ceasing to be used as money. Such then was the appearance of the great market. Toward the middle of the day, the gaiety reached a climax. The noise became deafening. The fury of the neglected vendors and the anger of the overcharged customers were beyond description. thence frequent quarrels, and, as we know, few guardians of the peace to quell the fray in this howling crowd. Toward the middle of the day, Alves gave orders to bring the slaves, whom he wished to sell, to the square. The crowd was thus increased by 2,000 unfortunate beings of all ages, whom the trader had kept in pens for several months. This stock was not in a bad condition. Long rest and sufficient food had improved these slaves so as to look to advantage at the Laconie. As for the last arrivals, they could not stand any comparison with them, and after a month in the pens, Alves could certainly have sold them with more profit. The demands, however, from the eastern coast were so great that he decided to expose and sell them as they were. This was a misfortune for Tom and his three companions. The drivers pushed them into the crowd that invaded the Tichatoka. They were strongly chained, and their glances told what horror, what fury and shame overwhelmed them. "Mr. Dick is not there," Bat said after some time, during which he had searched the vast plain with his eyes. "No," replied Actaeon, "they will not put him up for sale." "He will be killed if he is not already," added the old black. "As for us, we have but one hope left, which is that the same traitor will buy us all. It would be a great consolation not to be separated." "Ah, to know that you are far away from me, working like a slave, my poor old father," cried Bat, sobbing aloud. "No," said Tom. "No, they will not separate us, and perhaps we might." "If Hercules were here," cried Austin. But the giant had not reappeared. Since the news sent to Dick Sand, they had heard no one mention either Hercules or Dingo. Should they envy him his fate? Why, yes, for if Hercules were dead, he was saved from the chains of slavery. Meanwhile, the sale had commenced. Alves's agents marched the various lots of men, women, and children through the crowd, without caring if they separated mothers from their infants. May we not call these beings unfortunates, who were treated only as domestic animals? Tom and his companions were thus led from buyers to buyers. An agent walked before them, naming the price adjudged to their lot. Arab or mongrel brokers from the central provinces came to examine them. They did not discover in them the traits peculiar to the African race, these traits being modified in America after the second generation. But these vigorous and intelligent Negroes, so very different from the blacks brought from the banks of the Zambez or the Lualaba, were all the more valuable. They felt them, turned them, and looked at their teeth. Horse dealers thus examined the animals they wished to buy. Then they threw a stick to a distance, made them run and pick it up, and thus observed their gait. This was the method employed for all, and all were submitted to these humiliating trials. Do not believe that these people are completely indifferent to this treatment. No, excepting the children, who cannot comprehend the state of degradation to which they are reduced, all, men or women, were ashamed. Besides, they were not spared injuries and blows. Coimbra, half-drunk, and Alves's agents treated them with extreme brutality, and from their new masters, who had just paid for them in ivory stuffs and beads, they would receive no better treatment. Violently separated, a mother from her child, a husband from his wife, a brother from a sister, they were not allowed a last caress nor a last kiss, and on the Laconie they saw each other for the last time. In fact, the demands of the trade exacted that the slaves should be sent in different directions, according to their sex. The traders who buy the men do not buy women. The latter, in virtue of polygamy, which is legal among the Mussulmans, are sent to the Arabic countries, where they are exchanged for ivory. The men, being destined to the hardest labor, go to the factories of the two coasts, and are exported either to the Spanish colonies or to the markets of Muscat and Madagascar. This sorting leads to heartbreaking scenes between those whom the agents separate and who will die without ever seeing each other again. The four companions in turn submitted to the common fate, but to tell the truth, they did not fear this event. It was better for them to be exported into a slave colony. There, at least, they might have a chance to protest. On the contrary, if sent to the interior, they might renounce all hope of ever regaining their liberty. It happened as they wished. They even had the almost unhoped for consolation of not being separated. They were in brisk demand, being wanted by several traders. Alves clapped his hands. The prices rose. It was strange to see these slaves of unknown value in the Kazan market, and Alves had taken good care to conceal where they came from. Tom and his friends, not speaking the language of the country, could not protest. Their master was a rich Arab trader, who in a few days would send them to Lake Tanganyika, the great thoroughfare for slaves, then, from that point, toward the factories of Zanzibar. Would they ever reach there, through the most unhealthy and the most dangerous countries of Central Africa? 1,500 miles to march under these conditions, in the midst of frequent wars, raised and carried on between chiefs in a murderous climate. Was old Tom strong enough to support such misery? Would he not fall on the road like old Nan? But the poor men were not separated. The chain that held them all was lighter to carry. The Arab trader would evidently take care of merchandise, which promised him a large profit in the Zanzibar market. Tom, Bat, Actaeon, and Austin then left the place. They saw and heard nothing of the scene which was to end the great Laconie of Kazonde. Chapter 11. The King of Kazonde is offered a punch. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when a loud noise of drums, cymbals, and other instruments of African origin resounded at the end of the principal street. In all corners of the marketplace, the animation was redoubled. Half a day of cries and wrestling had neither weakened the voices nor broken the limbs of these abominable traders. A large number of slaves still remained to be sold. The traders disputed over the lots with an ardor of which the London Exchange would give but an imperfect idea, even on a day when stocks were rising. All business was stopped, and the criers took their breath as soon as the discordant concert commenced. The King of Kazonde, Moinilunga, had come to honor the great Laconie with a visit. A numerous train of women, officers, soldiers, and slaves followed him. Alves and some other traders went to meet him, and naturally exaggerated the attention which this crowned brute particularly enjoyed. Moinilunga was carried in an old palanquin, and descended, not without the aid of a dozen arms, in the center of the large square. This king was 50 years old, but he looked 80. Imagine a frightful monkey who had reached extreme old age, on his head a sort of crown, ornamented with leopard's claws, dyed red, and enlarged by tufts of whitish hair. This was the crown of the sovereigns of Kazonde. From his waist hung 2 petticoats made of leather, embroidered with pearls and harder than a blacksmith's apron. He had on his breast a quantity of tattooing which bore witness to the ancient nobility of the king, and to believe him, the genealogy of Moinilunga was lost in the night of time. On the ankles, wrists, and arms of his majesty, bracelets of leather were rolled, and he wore a pair of domestic shoes with yellow tops, which Alves had presented him with about 20 years before. His Majesty carried in his left hand a large stick with a plated knob, and in his right a small broom to drive away flies, the handle of which was enriched with pearls. Over his head was carried one of those old patched umbrellas, which seemed to have been cut out of a harlequin's dress. On the monarch's neck and on his nose were the magnifying glass and the spectacles which had caused Cousin Benedict so much trouble. They had been hidden in Bat's pocket. Such is the portrait of his Negro Majesty, who made the country tremble in a circumference of 100 miles. Moinilunga, from the fact of occupying a throne, pretended to be of celestial origin, and had any of his subjects doubted the fact, he would have sent them into another world to discover it. He said that, being of a divine essence, he was not subject to terrestrial laws. If he ate, it was because he wished to do so. If he drank, it was because it gave him pleasure. It was impossible for him to drink any more. His ministers and his officers, all incurable drunkards, would have passed before him for sober men. The court was alcoholized to the last chief, and incessantly imbibed strong beer, cider, and, above all, a certain drink which Alves furnished in profusion. Moinilunga counted in his harem wives of all ages and of all kinds. The larger part of them accompanied him in this visit to the Laconie. Moini, the first, according to date, was a vixen of 40 years, of royal blood like her colleagues. She wore a bright tartan, a straw petticoat embroidered with pearls, and necklaces wherever she could put them. Her hair was dressed so as to make an enormous framework on her little head. She was, in fact, a monster.